Joining me now is Florida Senator Marco Rubio. He is the vice chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and a member of the Senate Appropriations and Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining me. I want to get your reaction to the president's executive order on the border first.
Well, it's too little, too late. It's too little because it's not going to do anything to change the crisis at the border. Even under the numbers, even if he enforces it fully, which he's not going to, you're talking close to 1 million more people, on top of the 10 million that have already come in over the last 3.5 years. And it's too late. This idea of shifting blame and whatever he wants to call it, the truth of the matter is that this crisis, this mass invasion, this mass migration crisis has a start date. And that start date lines up perfectly with the close to 100 executive orders that he issued repealing all of the Trump immigration policies. That happened very early in his term as president, late January, early February. Basically, to summarize them, it said we're not going to enforce our immigration laws anymore. And, you know, illegal immigration is almost entirely based on incentives. If people think they can come and that it's going to be easier to come and easier to stay, more people will come. If they think the opposite, less people will come. And he sent that signal. That's when this started. Then he spent 3 years denying there was a crisis. But now he's had this election year conversion where he's doing kind of a, you know, pared down version of Trump policies. By the way, if Trump had issued the exact same executive orders he announced the other day, he would be called a racist and a xenophobe, and he was. But for those sorts of things. So it's too little, too late. It's not real. I mean, unfortunately,
these are national security issues, as you are well aware and have spoken about this so much. It's very concerning to me that this week, again, we heard FBI Director Christopher Wray telling a Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Tuesday there's an increasing concern of a potential coordinated attack in the United States, similar to the ISIS-K attack in March at a concert hall in Russia. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I'm obviously limited in what I can say, but I think you can read between the lines of what the director has now been saying pretty consistently. Here's what I can tell you we know, and it's known publicly, and you can put the common sense together to deduce what I'm about to say. We know that ISIS runs a human trafficking operation, a migrant smuggling operation. They do it primarily to make money off of it out of Central Asia. We know, and common sense tells you, that if ISIS wanted to get terrorists into the United States, it would make sense that they would use their migrant smuggling operation to get those people into the country. And so I think we have strong reason to believe that there are people in the United States, as I speak to you now, that are here for the purposes of carrying out one or more terrorist attacks. I think that's just logic and common sense that tells you that. These are parts of the world, these are countries in Central Asia where we can't vet people from there. We don't have a lot of information on people from that area. And the governments there don't keep records of it. So if someone shows up at the border, even if it's really them, we have no database to check them against. And so I think we have a right to be extremely concerned and worried. And I hope I'm wrong, but I fear that it's just a matter of time before we're going to have a Moscow-style attack within the United States, or more than one, by people that will be tracked back to their entry across the southern border.
So they have come in already. I mean, we already know that one migrant who came last year, July 2023, shot 2 NYPD officers the other day. Another one we know killed Laken Riley. You're saying that they have already come from the open border and are in this country right now, likely.
I think you can assume that among 9 million people and ISIS controlling a migrant smuggling ring, that they've gotten people into the country, and that is separate and on top of the crime problem you've described.
Wow.
You know, I've been the Venezuelan community in the United States, people that have arrived over the last few years seeking asylum, have been telling me for 1.5 years that dangerous gang members from Venezuela are getting into the United States. And, you know, a year ago I had no way to sort of prove it. I listened, I believed them, but I couldn't prove it. Now we are seeing the results of it. A very dangerous gang, Tren de Aragua, is a gang from Venezuela. It's wreaked havoc throughout Central and South America, and it's worked its way into the United States and has now been linked to human smuggling and sex trafficking operations in the U.S., violence in New York, violence in Chicago, potentially violence in Miami and in other places. That shooting again.
Wow. So
these people, by the way, are criminals, right? They're not committing crimes because they're Venezuelans or because they're migrants. They're committing crimes because they're criminals. They were criminals in their country, right, and now they're criminals here. And I think it's outrageous that they've been allowed into the country. That person that shot the police officer actually had his ICE deportation or asylum case dismissed. You know, he's just free in the U.S. and they weren't trying to remove him from the country.
Well, I mean, you make such an important point, and the NYPD told us about that very dangerous gang months ago. They told us that this Tren Aragua gang from Venezuela is raging in New York City right now. Here's Paul Morrow with me just recently. Watch this.
Trende Aragua. Well, first of all, they're identifiable by their tattoos, but they twig to the fact that Border Patrol is looking at the tattoos. So now what's going on is they're telling them, don't get your gang tat until you get into the country, because they want to get them past the border. But they're a really powerful gang, and they punch above their weight down in South America. They actually have expanded beyond Venezuela because they run a lot of the migrant routes going into Ecuador and up through Panama and up through our southern border. They're organized, which is a great force multiplier.
Very, very dangerous. And Senator, I want to thank you for your work on this, because we're all afraid of this. Meanwhile, President Biden suggested in his Time magazine interview that people have, quote, every reason to believe that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is prolonging the Israel-Hamas war for political gain. Senator, Biden was asked about this yesterday after the interview was published. He appeared to contradict himself again. Watch this.
Is Prime Minister Netanyahu playing politics with the war?
I don't think so. He's trying to work out a serious problem he has.
Biden also talking to Time about the ceasefire negotiations, saying Hamas could end this tomorrow. The last offer Israel made was very generous. Bibi Netanyahu under enormous pressure on the hostages, and so he's prepared to do about anything to get the hostages back. 42 House Democrats are voting with Republicans last night to pass that bill imposing sanctions on the International Criminal Court over its move to seek arrest warrants for Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders. But, Senator, I mean, how do you blame any of this after the pressure that the White House has put on the Israelis to do retaliation the way they want it done?
Yeah, so I think they're trying to play a game here. They're trying to appease the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, pro-Hamas base of their party by saying, by going after Netanyahu, but they're trying to tell these supporters of Israel, we're not against Israel, we're just against Netanyahu. Look, Israeli politics is very vibrant. There are a lot of disputes, but the one area that's not in dispute is widespread across the country, overwhelming support in polls and within government across the political parties is that Hamas needs to be significantly degraded and eliminated as a threat. In essence, Hamas, at the end of this conflict, has to be left in a position where they can never again do what they did on the 7th of October. That's a widespread political view in Israel, and no matter who's prime minister, that would be their view. So this continuing effort to undermine Netanyahu is a Biden ploy to sort of appease the far left in his base and the far left across the world who hate Israel, who are anti-Semites, who are pro-Hamas. And that's the game he's trying to play here. Look, and there isn't a day that goes by that he doesn't say something silly or ridiculous. I think it's gotten to the point where, out of bias or out of fatigue, many in the mainstream media no longer even report on the ridiculous things that our current president says.
No, they don't. And why should they? They have to talk. They could talk Trump all day long, right? Trump trial, Trump conviction. Well, so that gives them the pass not to talk about any of the failures of the administration or the policy failures.
Yeah, that's right. Look, I think that beyond that, I think there's this derangement that exists around Donald Trump. These guys thought that after Barack Obama was elected, that the permanent majority was here and they were going to reinvent America. Trump gets elected in 2016, interrupts their plans, and they go crazy. And they spent the last 7 years trying to destroy him and anyone who supports him, by the way.
Real quick on the Chinese nationals coming across the border. You just used the word invasion. Is Xi Jinping creating a little mini army? We've had 50,000 Chinese nationals crossing into America in the last fiscal year. That's just since October.
Yeah, so I don't think we know the full answer to that. I think there's always the possibility that some of the people coming into this country are doing so on behalf of the Chinese government. And then I think there's also the reality that given the choice, there are a lot of people that would prefer to live in America than in a communist China. Right. So I think there's a combination of both happening here. But I do think it's concerning because they've come from halfway around the world, entering the country in numbers that I think are pretty significant and at a minimum requires us to begin to answer the question, who are these people? What are their affiliations? But sadly, if you're a Chinese spy trying to get into America, you don't really have to cross the border, although maybe they do as well. Yeah. But you can just, become a graduate student at one of our universities or become a, a visa employee at one of our tech companies.